First Coast's most accurate forecast from the First Coast News Weather Team, certified by Weather Rate, sponsored by AC Designs.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm meteorologist Lee Southwick, joined by meteorologist Tim Deegan. Tim, I'm really excited about today's topic since you are our number one surfer, probably in all of the First Coast.
No, don't know about that, but I've been doing it a while.
So
let's put it that way.
You are an expert for sure. And today we're talking about marine hazards. So as we know, it is Florida and Georgia's Severe Weather Awareness Week. Georgia's topic today for Tuesday is thunderstorms, but we're focusing on Florida's topic, which is marine hazards and rip currents. So we're going to start off, Tim, quickly with just a bit about rip currents and what to do if you're caught. Have you ever been caught in a rip current?
Well, and we can get into this later. Actually, as a surfer, you look for rip currents, but we don't want people to necessarily. In fact, if you're looking for a place not to go, don't go where the surfers are. I could ramble on about this forever, Lee, so you tell me when I should shut up. First of all, I've always thought, and this is not me being critical of the National Weather Service, but I've always thought that initial line, do not panic or fight the current. Isn't that so tough? I mean, if you're ever in a situation which you don't want to be, the first thing you do is panic. So I get the point, but I almost wish it would say, when you feel yourself panicking, take a deep breath and here's a few things to do. But I think especially in water, it's so tough because, of course, your body is looking for ways to breathe. And maybe from that point, Lee, and I know this is why you're doing it and others, is that what people tend to not realize, I think, is despite the hurricanes, despite tornadoes, I think still rip currents are right up there with lightning as being the most deadly weather natural event, right? And in fact, folks, if you missed it, Lee did the lightning safety discussion yesterday. But I think because it only happens normally at one person at a time, it doesn't get the attention. But as we know, through the year, you add the some lightning strikes or deaths from people drowning, rip currents really serious. So yeah, you should look for them. Now, what was I talking about when I said surfers look for rip currents? Here, and so here's what I'm saying. And that is that a surfer, when you catch a wave, you don't want the wave to break all at once. Sometimes, in fact, you had a picture of a surfer sort of going along the wave, right, instead of straight in. Folks, Lee knows about surfing, so I'm really talking to those of you who don't surf. But you don't want the wave to break. We call it closing out. Well, if there's a rip current, that is a current going in against the wave, it will create a break in the wave. And so surfers like to sit on the edge of the rip current because then the wave will have an opening, will have a face. But there is sort of a counterintuitive hint there, right? And that is that if you want to go get wet and you're wondering where might the rip current be, if you see a group of surfers in one particular spot, like for instance, that pier creates a rip current and a sandbar and a channel. That's why people go to the pier. I don't like to go to the pier because there's too many people, but that's a whole nother story. But for instance, if we could all fly at 100 yards above the water, right, it'd be a little easier to find a rip current. So these are great to have. What I actually envision happening someday, and maybe it's beginning to happen, is that our lifeguards will have drones like this, and then they can tell people where you can see the rip current. The problem for us swimmers is we're not 100 feet above, right? We're actually in the water. But if you were to have a chance to look at this one particular shot for a while, that is, there'd be a couple sets of waves, that if you saw a place where the waves were not breaking, that's normally where a rip current is, because that means the water's going out in the other direction. So that's another way of saying if you see a group of surfers, you don't want to go there, not just because being around surfboards is dangerous, but more than likely that means there's a rip current nearby. Now, there's another reason surfers like rip currents, and that's because we know the current will take you out. In other words, but as a swimmer, if you don't want to go out, don't go where there's surfers are paddling. In other words, for me, if there's not a reef around, and we of course don't have any reefs in Florida, we're looking for easier waves to get up through the waves. I mean, easier ways to paddle through the waves. And when it's really big, we'll sit there on the beach sometimes 10, 15 minutes looking for the rip current because we actually want to get in it to get out beyond it. Okay, so what about you're out there and you realize you're panicking, right? And so the tip, of course, is to swim parallel to the beach. And I think that's a great tip. I think it's still kind of counter to what our body wants to do. Our body just wants to get in, right? So what I tell people, if that whole swim parallel doesn't seem to make sense, if you've spent any time in the ocean, you know the quickest way to get into an ocean or get from the ocean to the beach is to catch a wave, body surf, right? If you're beginning to panic or you're with friends that are panicking and you say, hey, let's get in, let's all catch a wave. If over 5 or 10 minutes, everybody's having a hard time catching a wave, you don't even have to look. That's your clue of, oh my gosh, we're probably still in the rip current. So yes, swim parallel to the beach, but another way to think about it is swim just a little bit farther where you think you can catch a wave in. Because if you feel yourself being able to catch a wave, that means the rip current is not there and you can take it in. So does that help at all?
That was excellent.
Okay,
I loved all
good,
of that.
good.
You know, and because as you mentioned, one, it's hard to say don't panic. Of course, you want to relax because you were right. We actually just reported on this too, and the National Weather Service sent out an update about how they actually consider rip currents the #1 weather-related killer in Florida. And it has to do with drownings because of panicking, not because the wave takes you down and holds you down. As we all know now, it's a current that sucks you out, and then you panic and you exhaust yourself.
Exactly.
And therefore you drown. So I think you had all great tips. I didn't even think about really trying to body surf back in. And another tip that they wanted us to share too is that if you get tired, you just try to float
Yes.
and then wave and
Yes.
have them hopefully you're near a lifeguard or other strong swimmers or surfers. Surfers save lives all
Yes,
the time.
absolutely.
when
And in fact, you reminded me of something, another sort of tip, which is really just what you said. That is, and this is maybe hard to do again when you're panicking, but try to work with the ocean. You're not going to beat the power of the ocean, so try to work with it. So yeah, initially, if you run out of breath, try to just float, right? You're not going to be in trouble if you get in late. Your main concern is you just want to keep breathing, right? So float, try to relax. And actually, because those rip currents tend to head out and then fan out, if you can get yourself to relax while you're floating, it's probably going to fan you parallel to the beach and get you to a place where eventually there are waves. So yeah, if you can, like Lee said, if you can get yourself to relax and float, and maybe with your friend, you're doing the same thing, probably the best thing.
And I do a lot of school talks, and of course we touch on rip currents and how to try to get out of them. And I think you could answer this again as a surfer too, because you see a lot out there, but I get a lot of elementary school kids saying, I don't want it to take me out, what about sharks? So could you speak to the marine animals and the threat or lack thereof?
So I'd be lying if I didn't say I think about sharks every time I go out there. But number one, it's their home. Number two, let's see, I've been surfing consistently since 7th. I'm going to do some real quick math here, Lee. So I've been surfing consistently since I was 11, and I now have my Medicare card, so I'm 65. So how many years is that? 54 years? Yeah. So that's a lot of time in the ocean. And I've never been bit. Doesn't mean it can't happen, but your odds are really low. In fact, you're actually safer floating on something in the water than walking through the water. What tends to happen, as we know in Florida, is that very often if a shark hits a person, they're not necessarily trying to get the person. That person is, like these people, walking through the waves and surprise the shark. So I'm going to get back to floating with that. So number one, it's going to be harder for the shark to get to you if you're floating, but you may say, well, I'm not a surfer. Well, just safety. And now I'm talking to parents as well. I think anybody in the water, if you can, go out there on something that floats. And then it's just not nearly as big of a deal if you're suddenly in the rip current. Boogie boards with the surf leash. This way, yeah, can a shark get to you? Yes. But are most shark attacks like the movies? No. So if you're floating above, you're going to decrease your chances of being shark food. But then also, if you're in a rip current and you're floating, then you're not, like Lee said, it's not like the rip current pulls you down to some dark hole. It's that mostly people become exhausted. Older people tend to have heart attacks. Younger people just plain sooner or later get exhausted. But if you're floating, then what's the big deal? You float until you find a place and you find a wave, and at the same time, the sharks can't find you. I mean, literally, there have been times where we've been surfing, someone sees a shark, and if someone like from the pier or the beach were watching, they would see all of us with our arms and our legs sticking out of the water. And the idea is let the shark go by, catch a wave, and then you're fine. But if you're floating, then you can do that. If you can't float, then that's a problem.
And I'd also say, like you mentioned, you can float out, let it take you. People who are afraid of, say, sharks, I would say that you are a much greater threat to yourself if you're panicking and trying to swim back in rather than a shark.
Because then you're thrashing, right?
Right. So just relax.
Yep.
And I think you take the lesser of two evils there, and maybe you'll see a shark, maybe you won't, and you get to swim right back in. I did change the graphic here, Tim, just to some other tips for marine hazards and staying safe. Of course, swim near a lifeguard, especially if you have young kids and they're out there. It's hard to watch them 24/7.
It is.
Make sure that
they're being paid for you. I mean, they're being paid to do that. Number one. Number two, if you go in places like Jacksonville Beach, Neptune Beach, Atlantic Beach, St. Augustine, your taxpayer money is paying them. So why not use them? And they actually, the lifeguards, I've talked to them all the time, and they'd much rather have a relationship with the parents of the kids. They can, number one, direct you and your kids away from where rip currents are. And then number two, it kind of lets them know where different people are. So remember, lifeguards are your friends. I remember, and I said it because when I was little, I tended to think of a whistle meant someone was in trouble, right? But of course, they're just there to help. And I advise parents that if you don't go to the beach much, go where the lifeguards are. That way, your family's somewhat in front of where they are. But I very often would say, go up to the lifeguard stand and say, hi, these are my kids. This is my spouse. We're going to be right here. Can we get you all anything? And then develop a relationship and that way they're, bullseye on where you are. Or if their child gets lost, they can find the parent. Or if the parent gets lost, they can,
Total assets to our community. Love our lifeguards. Another thing that's helpful, though, out at the beach is there are flags that let you know about conditions. Double red flag, the beach is closed to the public. Purple, dangerous marine life. That's not just sharks. It can be jellyfish, stingrays. What else? Have you seen anything else out there?
Those are the big ones. I mean, there are, I've been told by those who fish for kingfish and tarpon that they can actually pack a wallop. I mean, even dolphin for that matter. But I think primarily you're talking about sharks, and you're talking about jellyfish. And really the main kind of jellyfish, and I think it's great they use purple, is the Portuguese man-o'-war, which kind of have that purplish bubble, right? You want to be aware of that. But those are probably them.
And then the last tip that they gave us is swim at least 100 feet away from piers and jetties because, as you already mentioned, Tim, that's where the rip currents are. But we do know that surfers go to the piers.
They do. They go to the piers, and not necessarily where you'll find me, but a lot of surfers do go to the piers. And you can sort of see it in this wave. So that's what I mean. And there's an open face there. We don't like it when the whole wave comes over at one time. And the reason that open face is probably there is because if you can picture the water's always looking for ways to get out, right? Waves bring it in. Water's always looking for ways to get out. That's really what a rip current is. And because it continues to get out in a similar place by the pier, then over a period of time, it digs out a channel. And so over a period of time, that's where the water is always going out. So that's almost always a dangerous place. But then I think another reason they mentioned piers and jetties is because you can see what's above the water, but you don't know how that piers or how the rock from the jetties, where it is below the water. And the last thing you want to do is you're out there swimming along, or maybe even you're body surfing, and you body surf into a piling or a jetty. That can cause some pretty significant problems as well. Plus, you also have anglers, fisher people, and they're throwing hooks, over the side. You don't want to be, you don't want that hook to bait to get you either. I mean, that's another whole gig. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons don't go out in the water near a pier.
Yeah. All right, and then this is all for surfing. The next topic we're just going to hit on is boating safety as well. Florida has the most boats out of any state in the United States, and so Andy and Bella, my producers behind us, they're going to run a package that I did last year when it was Boater Safety Week, but just to touch up on those safety
Should we
tips.
tell people that you're a boating family and you speak from experience?
No.
Because she does, folks. So listen up.
So before you and your loved ones jump on a boat, here are some friendly reminders when it comes to boat safety. Captain Mike Haas with Seatow expects anywhere from 30 to 50 rescue jobs this Memorial Day weekend.
Mainly, it's operator air.
While his jobs usually include boats that have run aground, run out of gas, or need battery jumps, worse accidents do happen, and that is why he stresses always wearing a life jacket.
When something goes wrong, it happens so quick that there's not a lot of response time. You might not have a chance to put it on, or you might not be able to find it if the boat rolls over or floods and could be caught up and you could drown.
75% of boating deaths are due to drowning, and 2/3 of drowning victims were considered good swimmers. Many of these deaths could have been avoided if the victims were wearing life jackets. And there are many different modern types of life jackets you can select for your safety needs and comfort.
These are the easiest to wear because they're light. I recommend these.
Always check the weather before heading out and keep an eye on it while on the boat.
Storms can come up quick and you can get yourself in a lot of trouble.
With strong winds and high waves, reduce your speed and head to shore. With water spouts, head at a 90-degree angle away from the apparent motion of that water spout. With lightning, head to shore or stay in the boat's cabin. Even outside of the weather, stay aware of your surroundings on the boat.
If you go to stop, always look behind you before you throttle down. People aren't paying attention, they're talking. And just look out for the other boater.
And don't forget to gear up properly before you launch your boat.
Make sure you and use all the safety gear that's available for you.
Remember these tips and have a fun and safe weekend on the water. In Mayport, I'm meteorologist Lee Southwick. First Coast News on your side. All right, so we thank you for joining us today. Of course, this is Severe Weather Awareness Week for both Florida and Georgia. And tomorrow, the topic is tornadoes for both states, actually. At 10 a.m., there's going to be a statewide tornado preparedness. They're going to sound the alarm. You go to your safe spot. We're going to run through that. But then we are also going to be back here tomorrow talking all things safety when it comes to tornadoes and severe thunderstorms. So we will hope you join us then. But for now, thank you for joining and learning all about marine hazards.